with us about the ways scientists help conserve biodiversity. You can join this conversation at any moment by leaving a question in the comments below. Welcome, Jackie.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
So just to get us started, can you explain what a herpetologist is, what you do as a herpetologist?
So a herpetologist is a biologist who studies the ecology and conservation of amphibians and reptiles. So particularly focused on those two groups of animals. So frogs and toads and snakes and lizards and turtles.
Wow, okay. So how did you get interested in frogs and toads and snakes and turtles?
So I've had this really great childhood. I had a great childhood where I could go out to the local creek with my older brother and catch these animals in the wild and get to experience them and learn about them in nature. And we could ride our bikes to a local area and catch snakes there and observe them in the wild. And so that was a huge piece of my basically falling in love with these animals. And then once I fell in love with them, I wanted to know more and more about them. And so I've had this great opportunity to turn that, sort of childhood hobby and passion into the career that I've chosen for my life. Now we do science to try and protect those animals, understand those animals so we can protect them more effectively.
Wonderful. And can you tell us a bit more about some of the science that you've done that's helping to protect turtles?
So we've done some work, some examples. So turtles are, as a group, are quite a threatened group of animals. There's about 350 species of turtles on the planet, and over half of them are threatened with extinction or already extinct. So it's really important, in my view, to do science so that we can inform decisions about how to stop those threats or protect the animals from those threats. So some of the work we've done, for example, has looked at ways to prevent turtles and snakes from getting on roads where they might be struck by vehicles. This is one of the biggest threats to these animals, is when they're trying to cross roads, they get run over by cars. Mm-hmm. So if we can put up proper fencing and then eco passages to guide them safely under the road instead of across the surface of the road. So we've done some science to test how well different fences work and how well different eco passages work. And that's really important for then, making good decisions about which kind of structures to put in place to protect these animals and help them in their daily migrations across the road.
So if you build a tunnel under the road, turtles will use that to cross under the road instead of over it.
Yeah, but the key is it has to have a really good fence to guide the animals. These turtles, turtles live for decades, right? Turtles can live for 50, 60, maybe even 100 years. And they do migrations every year along the same path. And then we fragment habitat, we build roads in the way, but the turtles still want to make those migrations. And so they're really tenacious. They want to cross right there because that's where they've always crossed. But if we put a good solid fence that guides them to that hole under the road, it'll force them to use it, and they'll use it. So the key to an effective strategy there, what we've discovered, is a really solid, good fence. No holes, no ways for the animals to escape through. The fence has to totally guide them right to that eco passage or culvert under the road so that they get safely through to the habitat on the other side.
And is this time of year, it's the first day of fall today. Yeah. Is this time of year a time that turtles are active? Do we need to be watching for them on the roads right now?
It is actually, and even snakes as well. So right now, the animals are on their migrations from their summer habitats to their overwintering habitats to their hibernation sites. And so with the cooling temperatures and the shortened photo period, the animals are moving on these migrations. And so keeping your eyes out on roads right now is really important. In fact, we've seen just on my neighborhood walks, I've seen quite a few snakes, garter snakes and red-bellied snakes on their fall migration back to their overwintering sites.
Do you still go out just for fun, looking for turtles and snakes and things like that?
Not as much as I'd like to. So I do get to go out and accompany my graduate students when they're doing their field work. So I get to live vicariously through them and do field experiences with them. I do take just nature walks locally, take my daughter out and go out with my husband, and we walk about in the woods behind our place and down to the Lake Laurentian Conservation Area. And again, just like I said, in my neighborhood, there's garter snakes and red-belly snakes and painted turtles walking around here too. So I get to do that still, but I don't get to live out in the field and do the amount of field work I used to do when I was a graduate student. which was life-changing experience. It's so amazing to be able to immerse yourself totally in nature and collect your data like that.
Absolutely. Fieldwork is so much fun. Could we meet, I know you have a turtle ambassador, just like we have animal ambassadors at Science North. You have a turtle ambassador. Can we meet him?
I gotta get him. We'd like to introduce you all to Adam. Here he is.
Oh, he's so cute. Look at his eyes. They're so big.
So he's a spotted turtle. I actually hatched him from an egg during my master's research in 1993. So he's not a young turtle anymore, but I should mention that he's actually an endangered species. So on an international scale, on a Canadian scale, and on a provincial scale here in Ontario, he's considered an endangered species. And so I have a special permit from the government to have him as a teaching animal, as an animal ambassador to use in different education programs. So that's why I still I have him, and I use him for opportunities like this to tell people about turtles and why turtles are so cool.
Can you show us his shell, the back of it? That's so cool, eh? That always makes me think of stars in the night sky or something like that. They're very...
It's funny you should mention it. Well, as given your background, that's not surprising that's what you would think of. But a long time ago, actually in like 1998, I actually wrote a poem about how turtle, the carapace, the back shell of a spotted turtle looks like a constellation of stars. Because that's exactly what it looks like.
Oh, we have a question. How old is Adam?
So he was hatched in 1993. So what is that, 27 years? So when I show him to my students when I'm teaching at the university, and he's older than most of those students, right?
Wow. But turtles can live to be really old. You mentioned that. Yeah. So, tortoises probably live for 175 to 200 years in some cases. And snapping turtles, one of our Ontario species, they live probably for 100 years, probably more. The challenge is it's really hard to age a turtle, and it's hard we can use mathematical models to estimate how long they might live. But, in one person's lifetime, you can't actually track a turtle for that whole lifetime because they might outlive you. Makes it hard to do research on these guys. And is that one of the reasons that it's basically all of the turtles in Ontario are threatened, or?
Yes. So we have 8 species of turtles in Ontario, and all 8 of them are listed as species at risk at the federal level. At the provincial level, 7 of the 8 are listed as species at risk. So turtles are in trouble. I mentioned that, of the 350 or so species, over half of them on a global scale are considered to be at risk of extinction or already gone.
Mm-hmm. So part of it, that long lifespan, also their habitats, right? They need wetlands. And
they need wetlands too, right? So when they do these migrations we were talking about, they go to wetland sites to spend the summer to feed. They have different wetland sites that they might use to hibernate, but then they also use terrestrial habitats to lay their eggs, right? Females have to go up on land to lay their eggs. And then they also will use terrestrial sites for feeding, depending on the species, like wood turtles, one of our Ontario species. They walk up into the woods and they eat berries and they eat mushrooms. Really? So they need intact forests alongside the river where they live. So we need a mosaic of habitats. And in this area, in the Sudbury area and the Georgian Bay area in general, the turtles actually nest on those big Cambridge shield rock outcrops, the Precambrian shield rock outcrops. So we need that intact mosaic of rock outcrop, forest, and wetland to meet all the needs of the turtles for their annual cycle.
Wow, and they all need to be connected, right? Because they need to maintain. So is that, where the turtles are at risk, it's the same places where humans are living, right? Like with you can overlay that map of human population with species at risk, not just turtles, and they overlap nicely. So when we're talking about conserving biodiversity, we're talking about conserving, habitat right around us, right where we're living.
We can try to conserve habitats right where we're living, but we can also do other little things to help with the animals that might be in our area. For example, the turtles you might see crossing the road right now, help them across. And I'll say that what goes with that is don't take the turtle somewhere else where you think might be better for the turtle, Because as I said, for decades, the turtle's been walking that same path. She or he knows exactly what they're doing and they know where they're going. So just help them safely. If it's safe for you to do it, help them across the road and let them go on their way. But don't relocate them to the wetland near your house that you think might be better for the turtle, because then the turtle will be lost and it will try to migrate back to where its home is. So best to just help it across. And we always have a rule that we have to say, go make babies so that they are safe in the environment and move on.
That's some great information for us to have. Absolutely. So any of you who are watching now, if you have any questions about turtles, about biodiversity in general, or even about snakes or frogs, anything like that, go ahead and ask Jackie. Just leave your question in the comments below. So this idea of conserving wetlands, what role do scientists play in, conserving certain areas, making sure those areas are protected?
Yeah, so I think there's a really, really important role for scientists when we're talking about biodiversity conservation. And so in my particular field of herpetology, with my focus mostly on turtles and snakes, I feel that my role as a scientist is to collect really good, rigorous data so that the decision makers and the policy makers have the data they need to make solid evidence-based decisions. And so I can engage with the agencies that make the decisions. I can engage with the industry. I can engage with citizens and engage with students, which is a really important piece of it because that's training the next generation of biodiversity conservation professionals, right? So engaging all those people to collect really good, solid data that can then be used to inform decisions, I think is the key role that scientists play.
Excellent. Okay, we have a question from Derek Snyder. He's asking, which Ontario turtle is not endangered?
So the painted turtle is the only species in Ontario that is not listed as a species at risk, but at the federal level in Canada, across its range in Canada, it is listed as a species at risk. So the province hasn't listed it, but the country has listed it.
Wow, that's really some sobering news, just to know that all of our turtles are in trouble.
Absolutely, yeah.
Not something I knew before preparing for this talk with you. So, but there are actions we can take, and these evidence-based decisions really seem to be key. And of course, preserving wetlands has other benefits as well, right? It's not just the turtles that benefit from that. Do you want to speak to some of the other benefits of wetlands?
Yeah. So, just in general, when we work to conserve one species, there's going to be a domino effect for the whole system when we do that, right? So one of the classic examples is Blanding's turtles. So not what Adam is, but Blanding's turtle, which is another Ontario species. It's a larger bodied species and it's recognized with this really bright yellow chin and this sort of Cheshire grin that he has. But they are considered an umbrella species because when we protect the wetlands that they need and the intervening terrestrial habitats that they move around on, we're going to be protecting so many other ecosystem functions in that area. So this idea that turtles play a really important role in an ecosystem has an influence, of course, on the biodiversity in that system. And so if we work to collect data to best understand how to protect those animals, it's going to help protect the whole overall system as well.
And what are some of those functions that turtles play? I know they're a bridge, right, between terrestrial and aquatic ecosystems.
Yeah, so there's two aspects of this that I think are really fascinating. So the one is the amount of biomass that turtles contribute to an environment. So when we look at, so that's like the biomass of an organism in the environment is important because it in an ecological and biodiversity context, because it tells us how much energy is available and stored in that ecosystem. And of course, that amount of energy that's there is going to have an influence on the biodiversity that's there. So turtles, actually, compared to like mammals and birds and other things, they contribute an enormous amount of biomass to these ecosystems, which means they contribute an enormous amount of energy to that. And then the next step of that is the amount of energy that turtles provide transferring between that terrestrial and aquatic habitat. So there's an example that was done about sea turtle eggs on a beach in Florida. And there's a paper that was published that shows the energy transfer from those eggs. So just the eggs produced in 1 year on a Florida beach contributed to like the dune vegetation growing up on the beach, contributed to the protein energy that's in the water because of the animals that ate the hatchlings when they went there. Or, I mean, it's all part of the connected system, right? There's also the energy that went into the predators on land who ate on the eggs before the eggs were hatched. So, in one way, it's kind of sad to talk about the eggs being eaten, but there's an important role that those eggs are playing in contributing to that energy transfer across multiple systems. And so that's been quantified. There's an example of how science is informing this biodiversity information and informing this energy transfer importance to the ecosystem as a whole.
It's really teaching us that everything's connected, right?
Absolutely.
We say that a lot, and it's easy to sort of, yeah, everything's connected, but scientists really get in there and do careful studies and show exactly how it's connected and quantify that. And that's pretty cool. So we've got a couple more questions that have come in. Derek Sender is, I think he's in a little bit of a disbelief here, but he's asking, like, does that mean snapping turtles are also at risk?
And snapping turtles are. So when an animal is listed, it's given a status designation, there's different ranks. So there's, extirpated, which means it's gone from that area, or extinct, or extirpated means locally extinct. And then there's endangered, and then threatened, and then special concern. So there's these different rankings. So things that are listed as special concern are things that the problems will get, the condition of those populations will get worse if we don't do something, right? So that each scale sort of gets worse. So snapping turtles are listed, and they are listed as special concern. So that's the lowest at-risk rank, but it means we need to pay attention so that they don't go up to the next rank. They don't become threatened. So if we can understand the threats to them and we can work on mitigating those threats, then maybe we can keep them at special concern, or even ideally increase their numbers so we can take them off the list. But, scientists actually collected information that was amassed into a large report and then was assessed by a committee of expert scientists. And by looking at those data, it became clear that snapping turtles are in trouble. They need to be listed as special concern.
Wow. And they're so amazing to encounter in the wild. We were on a camping trip in Killarney this summer, and we saw a really big one. Like, I can't even get it on the screen. It was huge. And it was just magnificent. It hung out for a while, and it stretched its neck like way up. And when we got back, we were talking to park staff about it, and they were saying, oh yeah, that's Mustafa. And like, people know this turtle, and there's this whole relationship with it. And that's pretty neat. So encountering turtles in the wild is awesome. And actually that leads into Grace Schmidt shared with us that she found a painted turtle in her parents' backyard this weekend. And they've never seen a turtle in the area before, and it's not near wetlands. So she's wondering if maybe that painted turtle was on its migration path.
It probably was, yeah. So it was being in the right place at the right time for Grace and her family to have seen that turtle on its migration. And they will travel. So that was what I said before about connectivity among wetlands. So the turtles will move across terrestrial, through forests and lawns and whatever to get to the next wetland that they need to get to.
So people, if you go out and you look around, you'll probably encounter turtles. And I think this ties into, we have another question that Renata brought up. After scientists collect data, what's the path for that data to be used to make decisions at the policy level? And I think even before scientists collect data, sometimes it's actually people who are going out and exploring their area where they live who let scientists know that maybe they might want to collect data in that area. And that can lead to decisions being made.
It can happen in a few ways. So one of the ways is that scientists may go out and collect some data and then ultimately publish it in a scientific article, in a journal article, or it may be published more sort of internally in a report that then is submitted to the government. And they call that gray literature, but a report that goes to the government and to the people that are making those decisions so that they have those data in hand. Sometimes it might be that the government agency making the decisions, asks a researcher to participate and help get information. It might be the other way around, that the researcher writes a proposal to a government agency to say, we want to do this research project to collect information about this endangered animal. And in fact, at the provincial level in Ontario, there is a grant fund specifically for species at risk related research. And then once that research is done, then the decision makers can have access to those reports to help them make their decisions.
And are there rules around, if a species is at risk or threatened or of concern, are there rules around, habitat protection for that species here in Ontario?
Yes, so there's a particular example of the Blanding's turtle again, to speak to them. So that's a species that in Ontario, there's a very explicit Endangered Species Act, or provincial legislation. There's an explicit habitat description for that animal. So if you find a Blanding's turtle on the landscape, that immediately triggers a sort of a buffer of habitat that's protected around that observation.
Wow.
And at the federal level, there's a similar thing under the Species at Risk Act, the federal act. The Blanding's turtle, again, happens to have an explicit critical habitat description, and it's quite similar to the provincial one. And so again, if a Blanding's turtle is sighted and you put a dot on a map, it immediately triggers this buffer of protected habitat around that location. And it also connects the wetlands that are connected by that observation. So it protects everything, hopefully, that the turtle would need.
And that's the one with the yellow chin and the Cheshire smile. Do you have a picture of it?
Yes, so I can show you some pictures. I'm going to share my screen.
And while you're calling that up, we have another question from Stephen McIntyre. And he's asking what the most impactful action, or maybe a few actions, an average person can do to improve turtle biodiversity. And in improving turtle biodiversity, we're learning that improves biodiversity overall, right? Because they are sort of a key species.
Yes, they're a good umbrella species. So, I mean, one of the key things, of course, is to preserve the habitats that they need. So that's sort of the bottom line. Habitat destruction is the leading cause of decline, is the leading threat to turtles. And so protecting those critical habitats is essential to protecting the animals. And then, so what an individual person could do is when they, citizen science is a part of this story too. So if you see turtles that are living in wetlands near your place, report that information. So you can report it to iNaturalist, you can report it to the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry as well, so that they have those data points with like a GPS coordinate of where those animals are. And that can help, map where these animals are. And so when there's a proposal to maybe make a development in a wetland, the government decision makers are going to be armed with the information about what species at risk are in those locations.
That's definitely a very powerful thing that anyone can do. Oh, there it is. That really is a bright yellow chin.
Yeah, you can see his big smile there too.
Yeah, I see it. That's awesome.
Look, just to back up for a second about what I was talking about how the habitat can be protected. Just to mention that quickly here. This is sort of, a direct application of how science can inform biodiversity conservation. So I have on the left-hand side of the screen is the Blanding's turtle habitat description for the Provincial Endangered Species Act, and then on the right-hand side of the screen is how the habitat protection is allocated under the Federal Species at Risk Act. So you can see for the left-hand picture, there's a black dot in the middle that's got a red circle around it, and that's a nest site, so a Blanding's turtle nest site. And then there's a 2-kilometer line around that's a 2-kilometer radius, creating a circle around that nest site. And so within that 2-kilometer circle, then the wetlands that are there are categorized as important habitat for the turtle. And then also there's the yellow buffer that's around the outside, which gives some protection about the terrestrial habitats around there. So the way that the Blanding's turtle habitat is described at the provincial level, there's these categories. Category 1 habitat. This is the really important stuff. This is nest sites and hibernation sites. And these are the least tolerant to being destroyed by development. And then category 2, this is the wetlands. And then category 3, this is that terrestrial buffer. And so that at the federal level, it's very similar. If you have a Blanding's turtle observation, again, it's a nest in that particular example. Right away, you draw this 2-kilometer radius circle around that location, and any wetlands within that location, and they're all connected to each other, those become identified critical habitat for that animal. So it means that development or destruction of those wetlands should not happen because they have been classified as critical, important habitat for the persistence of that animal.
Wow. So that research that you're showing us right now, what would it look like day to day to go out and find these turtles and know that they're there? Like how do you do that?
So the main tool that we use is something called radiotelemetry. So I'm going to put Adam back because he's still here. So he says bye, and I'm going to show something else for a second. So he's back in his tank. So radiotelemetry is a really important tool for tracking where turtles go. I have a snapping turtle shell here. This is from an animal that we worked on around Highway 69. And you can see this device, if I can get my finger to work. There we go. You can see this device glued to its shell. This is a radio transmitter, and it's broken. It would have an antenna off the back of it. And so each turtle has a radio transmitter that's glued to the back of its shell. And then we use an antenna and a receiver, and it's just like radio stations. Each turtle has a different radio station. So this turtle's radio station was frequency 0.666, for example. So then I dial that into my receiver. I know I'm tracking that individual. I have an antenna, and I hear a signal. It's a beep, beep, beep. And so the beep, the louder it gets, the closer I am to that animal. So this allows us to reveal the secret lives of turtles, basically. Because even, as Grace said earlier, she was able to see that one painted turtle crossing her yard and hasn't seen them otherwise. So radio transmitters allow us to get into that secret life of turtles and figure out where they go, when they go there, how they get there, how long they stay there. And so if we're trying to figure out where the turtles hibernate or where the turtles are laying their eggs, then we can use these radio transmitters to follow their movements and identify those exact locations. So this radio telemetry has been an essential tool for us to be able to figure these habitat things out for these animals. And it's pretty easy to do because you just glue it on the shell and off you go. No surgery or anything like that required. It's just, we glue them on and let the turtle go, and then we follow the turtle.
But of course you have to catch the turtle first.
Yes. That's the harder part. We have, because we've been doing this for a long time, we sort of know the natural activity patterns of the turtles, so we know when is the best time to go out with our field team to be able to find the most number of turtles to get their radios glued onto them. Like spring is a good time. Now is a good time because they're moving again. So that allows us to catch a good number. As a scientist, we want to have a good sample size, right? We want to have enough turtles with radios on them to give us enough information to be confident in the data that we are collecting, right? And that's another key part of the scientific aspect of biodiversity conservation.
When I was a kid, I caught a few turtles, but now if you see a turtle in the wild, you should just observe it, right? Like if you're a citizen, maybe report that you saw it through iNaturalist or to you or to the government, but just let it be in this way.
Yeah. So observe it, enjoy it, make notes about it, take pictures. Collect a GPS coordinate because that would be good to know where it is. But yeah, it's actually technically against the law to catch that turtle, unless it is in imminent danger. So back to the idea of helping turtles across the road. Mm-hmm. If the animal, even if it's an endangered species, if it is in imminent danger, you are allowed to pick it up and move it. You're totally allowed to do that. That's within the law.
Now, on that camping trip I mentioned earlier, we were with kids, and we encountered frogs, we encountered snakes, and the kids wanted to catch everything. And we did encourage them. We're like, well, maybe you could just study them in their natural environment and their natural behavior and that sort of thing. But they really did want to catch them. Where do you stand on catching a frog or a snake?
Let me share my screen with you again to tell you what I think about that. I'm going to show you if I can get to it. This one. This is my daughter holding an enormous toad that we found this summer. So as a kid, I was out looking for snakes with my brother and catching snakes, and we would hold them and observe them. And I think that's why we fell in love with them. And my brother is now a high school biology teacher, and I'm a university professor of biology. So that tells you something about that. And this goes to the idea, what I call nature empathy. You have to get out and experience it and fall in love with it so that you then care about it. So my daughter and I found this toad not too far from our house. We were out for a walk in the woods behind the house. We found this toad underneath the piece of wood that you can see sort of in the bottom part of the picture there. And we held her, we admired her, and then we put her back. And then a week later, we went back for a walk. She was still there. We held her, admired her again, put her right back. And then I think it was a month later, we went back and she was still there. And we admired her again and put her back. But now my daughter has a connection with that toad and she cares about that toad. And I think that that's the key. We have to build that empathy. And so if it means we caught that toad, my personal opinion, that's okay. We did that, but we put it back. We didn't bring it home. We didn't take it somewhere else. We put her right back where we found her, but we did have that, 15-minute experience of holding her and enjoying her and then doing it over and over again because she stayed in that same spot.
Wow. Yeah, I would have to agree that has been my own experience as well. And Renata is sharing with us that is totally her story with becoming a biologist. That connection is really important. And I mean, before you were a professor of biology, you also taught biology on canoe camping trips with kids. So you've seen that not just in your own family with your own daughter, but you've seen that with other youth as well. Is that right?
Yeah. So, and I backed up just to this picture. So this is a picture of my brother and I, out as kids catching snakes and doing nature walks and stuff. And yes, so I taught with that brother. And this is the brother that's now the high school biology teacher. We together taught biology at a canoe tripping camp in Georgian Bay. And that was an incredible experience because I got to combine my passion for the outdoors, my passion for animals, and my passion for teaching all together. And so I got to take, kids ranging in ages from 7 up until 14 years old out into the wilds of Georgian Bay, Ontario via canoe. And we would go look for stuff and experience nature. And we would combine it sometimes with art. So sometimes the art teacher and the biology teacher would take groups of kids out together and we would, maybe find a bullfrog and then we draw it and then we talk about it or paint it and then talk about it. So I think that again, is such an important piece of the story about the future of biodiversity conservation. And that is getting people engaged by experiencing it.
And so now you've become a scientist and you've collected data that might actually be used by the government to protect areas, right? Like the Blandings turtle wetlands that you showed us. So that's really encouraging that this is a concern. Biodiversity is declining around the world, but scientists are working hard to collect data to help make those evidence-based decisions around which areas need to be protected. And that's really encouraging. Thank you. So are there any last thoughts you want to share with our audience before we wrap up?
I guess sort of the two main things I think I want people to know is that we do need science to support biodiversity conservation, but not just science alone. So, that's my role, as I said, to be a scientist and provide that data and evidence. But we also need collaboration, right? We need citizens to collaborate. We need industry to collaborate. We need government to collaborate. We need everybody on board. If we want to have a future that has biodiversity and maintains these ecosystem functions, these I learned a new word, nature capital, right? But, if we put money, dollar signs on things, then industry sometimes listens a little bit more. So, if we can talk about the importance that these animals, the role they play in biodiversity conservation, everybody together talks about that. I think that that's super important, right? We need collaboration among the scientists, the citizens, the government, and industry. And then the other thing I think that's really important, as I've said a few times now, is getting young people involved and engaged. Because they're our future, right? They're the future of our biodiversity conservation efforts. And so we have to instill that empathy for nature and that important connection to nature. And I feel like here in Sudbury, we have such a rare privilege to have nature surrounding us in so many ways. And so this is a great place, in my personal opinion, to be raising my daughter to bring her out and find critters.
Absolutely. And that's because of the regreening effort in part, which was absolutely a collaboration between scientists, industry, government, and citizens, right? There was a huge volunteer component where people were going out and liming the soil and planting the trees. So now we have wonderful green spaces here in Sudbury that are here because of that collaboration you spoke about. So
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time, Jackie, and for sharing your experiences with us. It's really inspiring, and I'm feeling hopeful. So thank you very much.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much.